The Pacers forced a Game 7, Samson. Win 116-103, lead by as many as 23 points. And I would say, I've titled this show, The Pacers Adapted to Persist. In many ways, they persisted to adapt and they adapted to persist. I feel played very persistent in a number of ways. Sometimes setting multiple screens on the same possession against Deuce McBride to help free and create space for Tyrese Haliburton. Other times, posting and getting multiple post catches on the same possession and reestablishing position, crashing the glass and getting extra possessions or keeping possessions alive. They actually did win the offensive rebounding battle by 1 rebound, still giving up 13 offensive rebounds, but they themselves got 14. And there was just a lot of early attention to detail that you could see. That's the persistent way. Adaptations we will get into as the podcast goes on, but I think that mattered, that this was the first game that I noticed in terms of being of this series where the Pacers, I felt, made several in-game adjustments in addition to game-by-game adjustments. So how did they force a Game 7, Samson? Broad strokes.
It hasn't been as often as I would have liked where we get to point at Siakam and say, like, you did it. But yep. Game 6 was his. It's the stats are good, but he was much better than the stats convey as well. You talk about like persistence, the way that he battled doubles and post-ups with escape dribbles to make sure like you're not getting it from me. Not yet. I need a bigger advantage to come along. I thought that was great. It was pretty clear. I thought he could have had a couple more trips to the line early on in this game too, but he brought it. Like he you know, they just released the news that Josh Hart will try to play through an abdominal strain in Game 7. But you could tell, like, Josh Hart couldn't contend with Pascal's aggressiveness, the physicality early. Nobody else could. And he brought the ruckus. He was beefy. He was dominant on the inside. And the Pacers got to work through that, and that kept their half-court offense afloat as they made their adjustments on Jalen Brunson on the other end. You know, I know you mentioned like strong side help. Hey, that can be okay sometimes coming from the corner, especially if the shooting isn't as good. Overall, I thought, and that's why I wrote my piece about it, the front court became like a huge advantage in that game. And some of that is like really high level mid-range shot making from Pascal against cross matches, but working hard to get Tyrese loose. Yes. But Pascal, his physicality in that game, there was a marked difference between what we've seen in a lot of games. It was like they've been getting away with little guys on me, and I just have to see if they can meet that aggressiveness, that physicality. And he set the tone for the game, I thought, which put them in a super strong position.
Fun stat about Pascal Siakam in this game. His usage rate was 32.9%, the highest of any game in the playoffs so far. And that's something like a callback from our prior episode. Both of us talked about if Tyrese is going to be face guarded this much and he's going to be hunted this much, and if that's going to lead to him potentially them playing more 4-on-4, then they needed to tilt more of the offense to Pascal Siakam, and they definitely did that. They were very purposeful with it, and he was very purposeful with it because you could see multiple times where he recognized, like, I have a mismatch here, and he was demanding it. He was pointing, reverse the ball, bring it to this side. Sometimes he was posting both sides of the basket.
Him on the broadcast, actually.
Oh, really? Could you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get to hear that part of it.
Right.
And then, I mean, one of my favorite possessions. I like it a lot when you get to see Pascal Siakam drive to the basket and kick on the move to Miles Turner, who then follows that up with a secondary drive to the basket. A big-to-big secondary drives.
Yeah.
I didn't think the Knicks shell was quite as good in this game, but seeing as how often Siakam and Obi Toppin and Miles Turner all put the ball on the floor with multiple dribbles and we're getting to the basket, super fun to watch.
Yeah, and it is like we talked about this more so in the Bucks series because Pascal had a good game with this. But that escape dribble, like if you're going to double, make the shell extend then. Like that escape dribble to the corner, especially if you're being doubled by two smaller players, you still have the avenue for the overhead pass. Get it deep. See if they'll follow you to the corner and you got to create that 4-on-3. And in some cases, like if you drag them far enough to the sideline, you might be able to create a 2-on-1 close to the basket for your teammates. And Pascal, like his unwillingness to surrender the ball in the easy way and make the team like, you got to come take it if you want to make me pick up my dribble, really helped change the way that they worked through the post and a lot of those post mismatches. And there is just like turning the corner, getting the shoulder down, stronger finishing on the last step. The last dribble is coming a little bit deeper, just way more work to get farther into the paint. And it was palpable, the difference.
I mean, there was the one possession where they threw it to him twice where Aaron Nesmith was adjacent to him.
Yeah.
And Aaron ended up putting the ball on the floor with his left and getting to the rim, mostly because of what you just described, that Pascal had drug out the help far enough that Aaron had a wider lane. But I actually do want to show you 2 clips because I found this interesting because not everybody watching this might know it, but you and I did a separate paywalled mailbag where somebody had put in a question about talking about the Bucks sending Tyrese to his left and weakening him and using ice coverage. And they had essentially asked, like, what secondary actions could you connect to that with he and Siakam to get further into play so that it's not just filtering to the weak side? Because a lot of times in that Bucks series, they were popping Siakam to the 3-point line. Brook Lopez really wasn't coming out there, which is okay in certain circumstances because if he runs a DHO, then the person coming up out of the opposite corner's going to have room to play with there. But the other side of it is you're not getting action or shots for either Tyrese or Pascal. A lot of times when you watch the Pacers, they are a more egalitarian offense. They typically will move the ball to the other side of the floor and try to find advantages there. The problem was early in the Bucks series, it was like, this isn't really, I don't really want to watch a Miles Turner step back self-created 2. What else could you have done to perhaps keep the ball in Tyrese's hands? And at the time, my answer was essentially this, that if you're going to run the empty side pick and roll against the team that, just like the Knicks, has aggressively tried to get Tyrese to stay on the left side of the floor as much as possible, that you pop Siakam to the elbow and then do a pop and get so that Tyrese can still get to the middle of the floor. In this case, the Knicks are still top-siding him, so he's not going to be able to get that handoff. So instead, he turns it into an inverted ball screen, tries to sandwich his guy, and then I just love that Pascal's like, okay, I see that you're coming and approaching with the screen. My guy turns his head, I'm rejecting it and get to the basket. This is the type of 2-man stuff and chemistry that I want to see even more between Tyrese and Pascal. I said in the last game, despite the fact that Deuce has been guarding Tyrese now for 2 games and that there could be a size advantage to be found for Pascal against Deuce, they only used 1 inverted screen in the entirety of Game 5. That was more prevalent throughout this game, including the 2 of them screening for each other sometimes on even multiple possessions where you're seeing it, at the full court level where Pascal is going to set, a blind screen there to try to get Tyrese open. Then he brings it up as the bring up ball handler. Tyrese setting the inverted pick, Pascal kicking it back out. And now it's just a traditional pick and roll between the 2 of them. And Tyrese keeping that dribble alive, stepping back to the left and making the shot. So it was more of an effort to me where in the past you might have seen them filtering some of this stuff to the weak side, or it's not ending in actions for the 2 of them. More of an emphasis on this is an elimination game. We need to lean on our 2 best players. Hence why Pascal's usage rate is 32.9%.
Friction. That was funny. That was when I was watching the game with the leg. And when Tyrese started like grinding towards that screen, and the leg was kind of like, oh, what's he doing? And I was like, I think that's good because it's making Deuce make a decision here. And also it like softens Precious's idea of like, what are my responsibilities now? And if Deuce doesn't fight that hard, you get to have the inverted pick and roll empty side, if Deuce is on the bottom side there, that's like, ooh, are you sticking around? Or is Tyrese coming free for a really easy short pass for a wide open 3? And I don't know the numbers on this. I'm sure you can look it up and correct me, but the frequency with which Pascal is sticking screens has gone up and up and up and up to my eye test. And friction. Forget like slipping loose. Yeah. You're slipping loose to a shell of a defense that wants to take away the paint anyway. You're not scaring anybody. So what is more advantageous? Like against some teams and with some coverages, like slipping loose, you get into space and you might get a step, especially if you gather, the pass comes quick, you gather quick, you put it down, you might beat the dropping big. But the way that Pascal is typically played, plant the screen, let Tyrese make the defender at the bottom in drop or whatever level they're playing, make him occupy a separate driving lane, and Pascal, like, set the screen, come loose, and find yourself in space way more often. Not only to get Tyrese loose for whatever he wants to do with the ball in hand, but I think it's just better for Pascal's game too. Pascal's not been like a screen planter for some years now. He was an initiation wing for like 3 straight seasons. Some pick and roll, but like not a whole bunch. The frequency going up is good. Planting and landing more screens is good. And being able to play out of those 2-man actions is really good. The Pacers, they haven't delivered the promise of their team yet, but they find themselves in a game 7 where hopefully, Rick said it during the last game. He's like, well, game 7s are, Pascal. Obviously there's more players on the team who know what a game 7 is and have played in it than Pascal, but he was like, maybe it's just Pascal. I don't know. But this team has learned so much about itself, and we're learning so much about these guys. If they get a 2-man action that works and steal a game 7 on the road, I suspect that's how it happens. You can, it's Indy. You can always hope and pray that like the egalitarian offense, anybody could pop off really. Obi and TJ were the stars of the closeout game against the Bucks. It could manifest in many different ways, but having the 2-man actions between your 2 best players is very, very meaningful. I'm glad they search for it more. I'm glad they work hard for it. Good action, sometimes you have to work to enter that action and don't move away from it because the other team wants to make it hard. Make it hard for them.
I like that you bring up the screening aspect of it, because this is something that I actually talked to Fred Katz about the other day when I was on his podcast, because we were talking about Hartenstein doing that for Jalen Brunson in game 5, and the fact that he was setting more hit and hold screens was helping Jalen Brunson get loose in ways that wasn't happening in Indy to an extent. That wasn't the entirety of it. And we were talking about that with the reverse for the Pacers because of the way that Deuce McBride was guarding Tyrese. And I said all season long, the Pacers have kind of played screenless basketball. There was a large portion of the season where they led the NBA in non-contact screens. And that wasn't just because of Buddy being a blur. It's because they really value, as a coaching staff, they really value the quick out. So much so that you can tell this because of the way they started the season playing on defense. I always tell people to watch Miles Turner, especially the first few months of the season. When he would approach, he was playing up to a touch, but they weren't playing up to a touch coverage. He was going up and actually forcing that screener to set the screen because they didn't want to give up the slip out because it can create confusion. But in a series like this, against the type of coverage that Tyrese is seeing against a smaller guard, and for the reasons that you laid out on the last podcast, because he is a player who really, in order to get downhill against extra help, wants to use a low gather, and that's harder to do against a smaller defender, then you actually do need more screen help. And you're right. Like in all those examples from Pascal, he is hitting and holding to a greater degree than you would have seen from the Pacers bigs at the beginning of the season, when a lot of the times it's almost like a quick lunge. Like they want to use a quick lunge because they know that Tyrese is going to get that amount of attention at the top of the screen and get out. But against this type of coverage, the other way worked better. And as you said, that from Tyrese going up to set that short-angled inverted pick is probably the most physical I've seen him be with somebody while attempting to set a screen. Pascal didn't end up using it, and he didn't get full body contact there. But that's closer to what you see from like Luka, Steph Curry when they're at the free throw line area and they're getting top-sided and they're using their physicality to get those types of advantages. And that's something that's been missing. And in part, that was like water under the bridge, but that was in part why I was talking about Buddy Hield being a bridge between the two of them, because Buddy was a more physical screener. If Tyrese can take strides in that area, it definitely adds to what the two of them can do together and off of each other.
There's some potential even, especially Tyrese, depending on if quick guards become something, and like Tyrese and Pascal probably are spending the next couple of years together. There's a lot of potential for screen your own stuff. And while against Precious Achiuwa, maybe right now we're not exactly going to see that, but there's definitely going to be room for them to search that. And I know the Pacers correctly they wore it. That was what they were during the regular season. High octane offense. They were very good, but having it be that, expecting the secondary action or the third action as you tire out the other team and play with pace, like it's going to overlap over time. Yes, we're going to score. Other guys, the fourth guy and the seventh guy are going to score. We're going to run through these actions. There's a lot of value in that, but everyone knows playoff basketball is a little different at the very least. Saying we don't care as much about like the quick out and continuation into something new, making them guard multiple actions. It's like, we only get so many actions. This is game 6 elimination. let's keep it with our guys. Let's go to work with these two, and let's focus a little bit more on keeping the ball there. It helped a lot in that game. And it also helped them dictate at a slower pace. The Knicks had like no transition game whatsoever. Part of working through Pascal, there's a correlation there. Pascal is a slower worker, but he was quick relative to what I've seen from him, particularly in Toronto. And it really helped slow down what the Knicks were doing. Pascal is like low turnover rate. He's going to make like short passes. He's going to get deep, and there's not going to be a ton of run out opportunities against him typically.
I also want to talk about Pascal at the other end of the floor as well, because you talked about, I felt like maybe the most key moment of the entire game was at the timeout at the 5:15 mark in the second quarter, because Pascal had scored within the 2 minutes within that like 3 times on Josh Hart. And I tweeted at the game, I was like, I'm going to be really curious to find out what the Knicks do against him coming out of this timeout. Are they going to put Hartenstein on him right now? Are they going to start hard doubling him? What's it going to be? And as it turns out, the Knicks didn't make an adjustment directly out of that timeout against Pascal, but the Pacers made an adjustment coming out of the timeout on the Knicks' first ATO. So here's what I want to show about, just as a refresher. In the first quarter, Deuce McBride kind of pops off. Tyrese is still guarding him. This was actually an empty side pick and roll between Jalen, Brunson, and Deuce McBride. And because Tyrese is still doing the show coverage, that was a good counter by the Knicks to go to this a couple times in the first quarter, because it makes that recovery pretty hard for Tyrese, even though he is getting back in the picture. And the reason why for that, and why I asked you at the end of the last podcast of would you switch Tyrese onto Josh Hart instead of having him continue to guard Deuce McBride, is for this reason. So over the back end of the season, for people who don't know, this is the hack that the Pacers found for Tyrese out of this type of coverage. So the Clippers hunting Tyrese with Paul George. Norm slips out of it toward the rim. Tyrese, there's no way he's going to be able to get back in front. So what the Pacers do is the low man switches onto the screener, being Miles Turner. TJ McConnell, being the 45 defender, takes the corner, and Tyrese peels to the 45. He's able to get into the passing lane and snatch that pass, which is one of the better things that he does on defense. That's very difficult to do when you are defending a screener who's going to slip out into space, especially on the empty side, because that's way too long of a rotation for the low man to have to make to get clear to Deuce McBride and then for Tyrese to be able to peel it. So when they came out of that timeout at the 5:15 mark, you will notice that the Pacers deliberately put Pascal Siakam on Deuce McBride and put Tyrese on Josh Hart. This did not mean that the Josh Hart was not targeting Tyrese, but Josh, as we know, was limited in this game by this point in the game. And if he's going to release as the screener, he's going to be a lot more likely to do it going toward the basket rather than slipping out into space. So for the rest of the half, Pascal Siakam was guarding Deuce McBride. There was times where he was picking Deuce McBride up full court and guarding him. I felt like this was a pretty effective matchup swap that, if nothing else, gave Tyrese a break from doing that type of coverage as much. And it made the Knicks think, because Pascal hasn't guarded Deuce in this series up until this point. Certainly not in Game 5. So what did you think of that adjustment, or did you notice that adjustment? Or
I like it. And also, like, Pascal has to bring it, though.
Yeah.
Like that isn't going to work every game we've seen from Pascal defensively, especially since we've seen some like the court coverage stuff or awareness can wane. Last night I thought it was, very effective. And also it's something that like Pascal at his best is supposed to be the Swiss Army knife, that there is supposed to be like copious amounts of ways you can use him on defense, and you can gum up a lot of actions. And the fact that it was like a knuckleball that the Pacers are throwing, it gets, especially towards the end of the half when one team is surging, the other is like, we've seen the Knicks make some pretty gnarly runs against the Pacers. And especially, as you say, like finish out the half that way. That isn't necessarily what you're running with the rest of the game. Don't let the Knicks get used to it. But suddenly there's a lot of size with like motion, size with mobility that can gum up actions that, you're looking at, especially being Jalen, different reads than you've been looking at the whole series, basically. And I thought that's what makes it such a good call. I don't know if that's something you can just go to and you're like, yeah, this is how it works now. Maybe if Josh looks like, damn, that abdominal strain is like giving him hell, maybe they go back to it and they feel better trusting Pascal on Deuce. I guess we'll see. But I do like it, and I like the call that was made there. it's been encouraging to see some of those moments.
And that was an in-game adjustment because for the most part, the Pacers have been like, hey, Dante DiVincenzo lit us up. We're not going to change that. Then the next game, they put Nembhard on him. Or, Nembhard struggling on Jalen Brunson for a few games. Now we'll put Aaron Nesmith on him in game 3. Game 4, now we'll help off of Precious Achiuwa. They weren't necessarily doing that in game 3. To do this in the middle of the game, I think you hit the nail on the head there because you're not really giving the Knicks much time to adjust to it. Yeah. Because a point that I would counter and say is I've had some Knicks fans be like, why aren't the Pacers just putting Pascal Siakam on Jalen Brunson? Well, because the problem with assigning Pascal directly as Jalen Brunson's primary is his screen navigation isn't going to hold up. His length might hold up in late clock situations. If he gets hit by a Hartenstein screen, he's likely going to run into contact, and then Jalen Brunson's going to get wherever he wants to go. Nesmith's going to be able to get over the top at a better rate than what Pascal can. Plus, they don't want to switch Miles Turner out to the ball. They don't want to be doing late switch situations in that, not only because of the damage that Jalen could do against Miles, but because of the potential impact on the offensive glass, where if Miles is that much further from the basket, you're making yourselves more vulnerable. However, if you put Pascal on somebody who's going to be a frequent screener and he can switch out to the ball, he hangs in those spots okay. Like if Deuce McBride goes and screens for Jalen Brunson and it's a late clock situation and he's switching on to the ball, then it's all right. In this case, more often what happened is Deuce just kind of got marginalized because they didn't want to bring Pascal to the ball. And then the switch and recover, the show and recover was easier for Tyrese because it was against Josh Hart instead of Deuce. So in my mind, when I asked you that question on the prior pod, I was like, well, are they going to really want to put Tyrese back on Dante DiVincenzo in order to accomplish this? Because I was kind of limiting. My mind was limited just to Nembhard, but then to see them pull that out, I was like, that was a pretty smart adjustment that I didn't even really readily think about. But to your point, if it was over a larger sample size, and I'm sure the Knicks will look at this film and be like, hey, what kind of happened to our offense there? They never set a single ball screen for Deuce McBride. And like, that's what I would have done immediately. I would have been like, well, if Pascal's going to be guarding Deuce, despite his length, like, let's go set screens and let Deuce run a little bit of this offense and see if we can't get him back off of him, because that would have been the number one counter that I went to. I doubt that the Pacers will start that way. I don't think they'll come out at the start of game 7 with Siakam guarding him. But in the sense that, hey, Tyrese didn't have to do that quite as much in the same way that he was having to do in game 5 and in the first quarter when Deuce got loose a little bit. Better.
Yeah, shorter routes available to a bunch of players. And yeah, as you said, like, the Pacers shouldn't fear a switch, of Pascal onto Brunson, as long as they get it at a certain point in the clock. Pascal, just you sit left, and you just say, like, it's probably going to be pretty tough for you to beat me straight up and get a comfortable shot. Of course, it's Jalen. He can make like a hell of a lot of shots, but you're not supposed to judge defense based on, like, if the ball goes in. It's like you take a snapshot of when the shot is being taken and say, like, do you accept this as a shot that you allow? Pascal can certainly just, like, chop feet and guide right in a certain amount of possessions. Like, there's going to be some times that you fail. But playing the numbers game, just switching out certain parts late in clock, I think you win that numbers game. And this is a knuckleball you can throw. I don't know if we see it next game. I don't know what it looks like, but nice little wrinkle for the Fire Rick team.
Yeah. And to be fair, like, it's not just Siakam's length alone, because in the third quarter, Jalen started to get back on track a little bit because TJ and Obi were guarding and show and recover situations, and that was supposed to be a stay, and they were switching it, and it did not go particularly well with Obi Toppin switching out to Jalen, despite the fact that I think Obi had a overwhelmingly positive game. Those specific moments didn't go particularly well at the end of the third quarter.
That's not his spot, especially just the type of athletic. Obi is so unbelievably vertically and like north and south athletic. He's built in a certain way. Biomechanics go into how these guys move. Jalen Brunson is like a gyrating, like a buffer machine that could quickly swivel and pivot any which way. And Obi is like built kind of like up. It's hard for him to like pivot and swivel with a guy. That's a tough one. And I never blame Obi for not hanging in.
And that's why being the quote unquote Brunson stopper was about more than just contesting shots. It was also about not giving up those switches in the first place. So just going to throw that one out there. But overall on the Jalen Brunson coverage, He starts, I think, 2 of 13 in the first half, makes 2 shots. As you say, I like that you point out we're not just judging defense solely by whether Jalen Brunson makes or misses a shot. But what did you like about the Pacers' defense against Jalen Brunson in this game, or did you notice any differences from Game 5 against him?
So I didn't notice anything crazy outside of what we've seen. Like, we've seen a lot in the series so far.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Brunson has seen a lot in the series so far. And he's seen varying degrees of, like, a guy is sticking, a guy's able to stay on my hip, I'm being weaked. And to my eye, I don't know if this is statistically correct, I saw guidance towards the right hand, like more intentional, the Pacers leading him there. I saw like a little bit more bodies consistently than some of what we've seen in the past. And we saw like that strong side help from the corner. And again, there was length on him. The length isn't everything, but it is important in contests. And Jalen Brunson, a guy who's so comfortable in the middle of the floor, you need another avenue to disrupt and make his shots tougher. Length helps do that. I think that all those things kind of coalesced, calcified, crystallized, whichever one you want to say, into a meaningful defense in the first half especially, and then just some shot making in the second half. He works hard for his looks. He's going to find his way at some point in the game.
It's kind of like what you said on the prior episode, though, when you were like, if they can get him to 30 points on X% shooting versus 40 points on this marker, that's more manageable for them, which it was a quieter 30 points at the very least. But I do want to roll the film on something you said about them getting him and guiding him right a little bit more often, because somebody did criticize that I ran the film on how often the Pacers were allowing him to get left and get to the lefty layups and thought I was being overly critical. Well, that was part of the reason why the Pacers lost the game. And it was very hard for me to understand, so I pointed it out. So to be fair, I am now going to run the film on all the times that they influenced him right into help at the nail and say that this is part of the reason why the Pacers won the game, because they were far more intentional with it, especially even during the minutes when the bench were on the floor. Like Ben Shepherd has done 2 games now in a row where he's been one of the most active people at just sitting on his left hand and forcing him into the help at the nail. Here comes Obi. He's not letting him turn in that direction, and it's a pass out of it, which Dante DiVincenzo ends up getting to the rim. I think they do get a putback there. But the actual coverage on Jalen Brunson, pretty decent. Andrew Nembhard doing the same, making it hard for him to turn back over to that dominant hand. That's a tough shot. This is what you wanted to see for the reasons that we laid out, is what I had said about Tyrese Haliburton. Is he still going to be able to get to his right hand? Sure, but you want to make it difficult for him to get to his right hand. Not you're just readily letting him go off of a double drag to his right. There was too many possessions in Game 5 where it was way too easier. At the very least, if you, as you said, he is like a buffer machine. He can be very hard to guard. He's shifty. He's going to get to the spots on the floor that he wants to get. Once he gets there, the stunts needed to be way more committed when he was at the strong, on the dominant side hand. That was confusing for me. This was much better. Kudos to the Pacers.
It's basketball really can be about adjustments. And this is why everyone has trouble like analyzing regular season versus playoffs, is the dedicated game plan, the zeroing in on weaknesses, strengths. And Tyrese, like, Pascal hasn't looked as good as people wanted him to look over the course of the playoffs. Tyrese has not looked as good as people have wanted him to look over the course of the playoffs. Objectively, the Pacers, God bless them, they've got a chance in Game 7. But what are teams doing? They're hyper-focusing on these players' weaknesses and playing to them and saying, succeed at your weakness and you'll beat us. And some games they do. Or they're so strong in their strengths that they override that. At least make Jalen Brunson beat you on your terms, not on his. And that's how you get the difference of 18 for 35, which is 51%, versus 11 of 26, which is 42%, 44 points versus 31. It's a meaningful difference. And it's not just because like, oh, we didn't let him go left.
Right.
It sounds simplistic, but not letting one of the best players in the world go left isn't just the words, don't let him go left. It's a principle you start with. It's how the help is, like how you build out the help behind it. It's where you send the help from. Like you saw, Precious wasn't setting that pin in on TJ when TJ is creeping off of Alec in the corner. That means they get to load up the help differently and push Jalen into these parts of the court where he's more crowded. Whereas, like, if they hadn't, he has, like, the whole left side of the court. If they push him left, bad news. You have to structure it. You have to do it. It's not just words. It's intention. It's structure. It's follow through. It's execution. And the Pacers did a better job in Game 6. And I don't know if there's a spell in the Garden that Jalen Brunson is going to be like, ooh, and be able to get left or something. But I hope that they are able to, provide the same level of execution in Game 7. We'll see.
Because of the team that you've covered the last several years and the evolutions that they've made on defense, I also want to talk about this, that during the regular season, the Pacers allowed the lowest rate of corner threes in the entire NBA. So 7.69% of opponent shots came as corner threes. That was a point of emphasis going into the season because last year they ranked 24th in that category, and they felt as though they were very overzealous with the low man, that they had given up too many shots in the corner. And this game, as you had mentioned, and as I pointed out on Twitter, the Pacers have been helping off of Precious Achiuwa and Josh Hart aggressively since Game 4. But in this game, they were really helping off the ball side corner a ton. And maybe, they were probably somewhat emboldened on that because Josh Hart was limited. But also, to me, if I'm going to give up something in an elimination game and I'm going to tip my hat and say, well, the Knicks beat us, I'm going to be a lot more pleased by saying the Knicks beat me on corner threes from Josh Hart and Precious Achiuwa than continuing to potentially allow Brunson to get to the percentages that you just shared, especially on that clip right there. I thought that was really great help from Tyrese coming off on the corner, like we had talked about. Like, rather than some of the half-court trapping where they're forcing themselves to cover way more ground, when he has his back to the basket, particularly on that side of the floor, and Tyrese is guarding Josh Hart, that is when you pounce. And he's able to get a deflection there. So I just kind of want to get your thoughts, because this isn't something that the Pacers have done all year. Like, I don't know how many people realize. I think everybody knows that they limited the three-point line for the majority at the starting portion of the season, but they were putting a big emphasis on limiting corner threes. Obviously, you covered a Raptor team that was willing to give up a ton of corner threes in order to somewhat funnel shots to role players, but also because of their lack of center and other reasons going into it. But where do you land on the giving up of corner threes?
So there's a couple things intersecting here. So the Pacers, they were last year, they had the highest or second highest volume in the NBA that they allowed at the rim. Bad. Not good. However, they 24th in volume from the corner threes. Right. That switched to number 1. The shot chart is being realigned here. That results in a higher volume in the short mid-range against the Pacers, one of the highest in the league. They also allowed one of the highest percentages there in the league. Against some teams, it makes more sense to not allow the role players to beat you from the corner, to keep the ball in that short mid-range space, to stay contained, let the shell do stuff, and have Turner back there, for example, or maybe Pascal roaming off the weak side. That makes sense. Against a bruised and battered New York team that features Hartenstein in the short mid-range, that really features Jalen Brunson in the short mid-range, that shot chart and where you're funneling to is not exactly complementary to this, what you want to stop and what you want to be able to run out on. So this change against the Knicks, I think, makes sense. Of course, there's always going to be a battle, a tug and a pull about like how much you allow at the rim, how much you allow in the short mid-range, and how much goes out to the corner. The Pacers did something drastic that I think speaks not only to how they wanted to affect the shot chart, but how they also wanted to affect mentality on defense too. Guard your yard, as you've said before. This is a change that makes sense. Some teams, they'll really make you pay if you play like this. But as far as just the Knicks, this made sense. I guess it got colder in my room. I have to turn my heater off. It automatically turned on, if you could hear that. Keeping it hot over here. We need the heat for the agrarian economy of buckets.
And yeah, keep the shooting hands hot for
Yes.
tomorrow afternoon. But I think the lesson learned here for both teams is that it's not great to be dogmatic on defense. I think that's what the Pacers found very early on in the season. That I think some of it went into they gave up a ton of action at the rim last year. They were also giving up a ton of points in the paint to start this year, perhaps for somewhat different reasons because some of it's cuts, some of it's in transition. Like I think sometimes when we look at the stat points in the paint, we're just automatically thinking that all of that is coming off of half court drives, which isn't the case. But it's like, at least we're taking away something. Like if we stay home on the shooters, at least we're limiting one thing, and we're very good at limiting that one thing. The problem is that when you get into an in-season tournament championship game against the Los Angeles Lakers and you give up, 75 plus points in the paint, I'm not sure you're as glad that you allowed them to only shoot 2 of 13 from 3. Similar to everything you just described in this series. Like I said, I think that you're more pleased in a game 7 tomorrow that if you get more than you bargained for from Josh Hart or you get more than you bargained for from Precious Achiuwa, I think that the Pacers go out of that and say, well, we went into this with a purpose. We knew that's what we were willing to give up. Because you'll remember, I showed the one clip about Hartenstein running delay action at the top of the key, and I showed you a static screenshot, and I was like, what do you think of this? Because by my eye, just looking at it as a screenshot, I could not tell, what are you willing to live with? What is the thing that you are trying to take away, and what are you willing to live with? And by the next game, they're like, well, we're willing to live with whatever Precious Achiuwa does. If he's explosive as a cutter, we'll accept that. And I think that you've seen that through the progression of this series. So I do give them credit that they didn't stay dogmatic with it, because they could have. They could have been like, hey, this is what got us this far. Like, this is what our defensive scheme is. But they have changed it for the better, at least in game 6.
So forgive my chicken scratch, but our favorite podcast, Ready to Diagram, don't be, and this is the really bad chicken scratch, predictable. Look how bad that is. I underestimated how long a word predictable is. But yeah, don't be predictable all the time. So, JJ, God bless him. The best defenses are predictable. Yes, yes, yes. The best defenses can also. Did Steph Curry in 2019 expect to see Marc Gasol doing a hard hedge, getting the meaty hooks out in front of him, tipping the ball, and then a run out? He certainly did not see. He didn't expect to see the big Paella stepping out on him. The big Paella stepped out. Sometimes you got to switch it up.
And sometimes as a scheme, you have to switch it up. I would say that when we were talking about, predictability versus unpredictability in terms of actual coverages, sometimes individual defenders can be unpredictable, and you have the framework where you can adjust to them breaking from the scheme. And sometimes with the Pacers, it's like, no, they don't have the floor to manage this. Like, they need to know what the coverages are.
As you've mentioned, like, Nembhard is the lone wolf a lot of times who can freewheel without risking things elsewhere.
And then I did want to show, I hadn't seen that Josh Hart was planning on playing, but just look
at it. Was a minute before we started recording.
Okay. So just look at this possession, because I was thinking to myself, I'm like, well, if Josh Hart doesn't play, I wonder what direction they'll go in, because they have found some success with Precious Achiuwa playing backup 5. And in the second half, they ended up playing double big a little bit more. Watch Precious Achiuwa on this clip, and then watch Obi Toppin. Watch this. He's allowed to go pretty much anywhere he wants to on the court, and his defender doesn't follow him. It's like a reverse box in one. Like, when you watch a lot of these possessions, it's like that person is the one, and they're just in a one-man zone.
That's tough. That's hard to navigate as an offense. And you have to start trying to manipulate off-ball screens, and you have to start trying to manipulate a bunch of stuff, which isn't all the time inherent. And those are kind of tough to implement, I think, in game, those types of changes. Like, that's the thing about Precious, is that there's going to be some utility there. Some of it as a cutter, some of it as an offensive rebounder, but it's harder to scheme up, like, okay, how do we take advantage of how the team is playing? Whereas like Pascal, who gets some funky stuff, you can put the ball in his hands and say, like, we're fine with running the ball here, or kind of dictating that more of the ball goes here. You can't really do that with Precious. So I wonder how the Knicks navigate it. And I hope Josh is as healthy as he can be.
Mm-hmm.
I guess OG is probably out for game 7. I haven't seen anything, so I don't know. I hope if the Pacers win Game 7, I hope the Celtics are healthy, because the Pacers, I've watched this team, and I think repeatedly said to myself, like, damn, they're playing some injured teams. You play who's in front of you. It didn't matter to me that the Bucks weren't healthy, because it's like, well, the Bucks aren't healthy. They're going to play a fun and good New York Knicks team, and then they can prove themselves. Because the Pacers still have to prove themselves. You still have to play good basketball, better basketball than you have been. Maybe it comes in Game 7 and then against the Celtics. But, like, you deserve the run you get, but people are still going to look at it with, like, a wrinkled nose unless you play better basketball. And Indiana still can play better basketball, and I want them to play teams at full strength. I want to see that. So I hope that the Knicks are as good as they can be in Game 7. And I hope that the Pacers, in some games we've seen in the playoffs, you watch two teams go like an eye for an eye down the stretch, execution. Whereas like some of the Indiana games, they're like blowing a team out, or down the stretch, it's like there's a lot of mistakes on both ends here, and Indiana has come out on top. I want to see this team at their best against another team at their best, and I hope that's Game 7 and onward. I'm waiting for it.
Not to make this the entirety Pascal Siakam podcast, but if nothing else, in Game 6, you didn't want the Pacers to go out the way that they did in Game 5. They protect home court. They leave themselves in a different position, especially with Pascal, because that was very much a performance of this is why they brought him here. The things that he did in that game, that's why you trade for Pascal Siakam. Because I didn't mention that after halftime, the Knicks did counter and ended up putting Hartenstein on to Siakam, and Siakam continued to make good plays against that as well, especially the one that I mentioned about where there was the 2 drives in a row. But here, this one was from the first half, where they threw him on here really quick towards the end of the half. That ended up being a late switch. Tyrese drug it out. Pascal had deuce on him, and that's whenever you were talking about some of the double teams where he ends up finding Miles Turner on that curved cut, like tremendous cut from Miles for sure. And then this one too from the second half, like they didn't stick with this for that particularly long because Pascal was going at it enough that even when he kind of got caught in mid-range there, he gets off of it and then he ends up getting it against the stare down midi too. But the one where they had the back-to-back drives from both bigs against it, it wasn't as effective. Like, I didn't mind this adjustment at the end of Game 3. We talked about it a little bit, where I felt like it gummed up the Pacers' offense for how much they were looking for Pascal just to be a screener. But they were involving him in a multitude of different ways here to start the second half, despite the fact that the Knicks did cut into the lead there briefly when they trimmed it to 5, and the Pacers really responded out of that timeout. But to see him go at that many different matchups within the same game, in addition to being put on that many different matchups defensively, that's just to reemphasize that that's why the Pacers traded for him.
And that's a point of contention in the series too, right? This is what I wrote about in the piece, is you look at Pascal drive Hartenstein basically to the corner. The ball goes to Turner. Turner is a good driver for a big man. We've talked about his limitations, but he's a good driver as a big man. Who was waiting for him at the rim? Like, Hartenstein came with like the crazy rear view contest, sure. But the only way that they have somebody waiting at the rim really is if it's Precious. And if it's Precious, then they got stuff to sort out on the other end. So there's a real point of a contention that the Knicks have to figure out. And Pascal putting Hartenstein in the mixer is how you open up Turner for that kind of stuff, because Turner will draw that closeout unless teams want to make him shoot, which that's an option as well. But Turner should be able to, like, the ball goes down once, the gather comes. Who's meeting you there? Like, Game 7, it could be 24 points for Miles Turner in a blink. It could be, depending on how they work it. So there's avenues to success for this.
Because you have to wonder in that regard if the Knicks are going to be willing, if Josh Hart's limited at all, if they're going to be willing to put him on Siakam from the tip again. Because I don't think that I would.
Especially if Pascal brings it with the same intensity that he did in Game 6. Because that was palpable. Like, you could see it.
I mean, it's already harder for him to guard Pascal because of the type of post player that Pascal is. Josh Hart's guarding him with an armbar. You're guarding somebody in the post with an armbar. That makes it really easy for somebody who likes to use a spin move to be able to slither and get around you to the cracks on the floor, versus Hartenstein guarding him with a hand it's a little bit easier to guard him in that aspect. But then you can see that Pascal just decided, like, well, I won't go in the post then. I'll be able to do it from mid-range. I'll be able to do it off the drive. So he made really good adjustments.
Perimeter defense requires, like, contests are not as important. Post defense contests are everything. The reach, like it's a lot through here for Hart. So I don't know. We'll see.
One other thing that I wanted to ask you about from the first half. What was your reaction? And I don't want to use the word nervous because we're obviously watching these games to analyze them and attempt to be objective. But what was your thought when the Pacers tried and actually succeeded at stealing minutes without Tyrese or Pascal on the floor and went with all bench units with either Aaron or Andrew out there?
They hit their shots. They hit a 3. They were maybe 2 of 3 overall in the 2 minutes, and what was it, 25 seconds or something?
It was 5 in total. It was 5 minutes in total that they played non-garbage time without Tyrese or Pascal on the floor in this game.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the first run, and I think they hit their shots.
They did.
Yeah, and so you hit your shots, you hang in. It's just...
Were you all surprised, though, that they were willing to, especially because some of those minutes matched up when Jalen Brunson was on the floor?
I guess, but credit
those guys stepped up. They stepped up.
Credit to the Pacers. You can think about a lot of things on an NBA court. A lot of things can go wrong on a basketball court. We don't think about 98% of them because they're not happening. And then they happen. And then you're like, bonehead. You know, why is this happening? This is so stupid. Why didn't you do this? But it's like, I don't know, sometimes stuff happens during basketball. You want to mitigate. You want to protect against things. And you want to be able to, like, shoot better than expected during certain runs and defend better than expected and force misses and stuff like that. But I didn't think that much about it because they hung in. So, like, credit to them.
Yeah, I mean, those guys stepped it up. I mean, we haven't talked about him that much because it's a lot of the tension's been on Miles and Pascal, but Isaiah Jackson had some decent moments in this game. Like, especially even just defensively. There was one where Ben Shepherd did get hung up a little bit, and Isaiah had to switch out to Jalen Brunson, and he managed it.
Our age-old Ijax versus Jalen discussion.
I don't really know what has occurred since the mailbag that we did about that. Like, what exactly has gone on with Jalen Smith? I don't fully understand that. I'm probably going to need some more insights in the offseason about exactly
I'll tell you
how
what
that
happened.
Came about.
Rick tuned in. He said, "This, my fellow Baldy, has some interesting insights. Maybe we ride with him."
Yeah, I mean, they both definitely bring different things to the table. It's just that, I mean, Jalen didn't play well in the minutes that he got in the Bucks series, but neither did Isaiah. Like, there was a reason why they went to the Pascal Obi lineups, and then this series started. And as I pointed out, like, I kind of thought that they might look at Jalen just because Mitchell Robinson was going to be the bench big. Jalen can space and go to the corner, and also because Pascal's played so many minutes with the bench, they like some of those inverted actions. The minutes during the regular season with Pascal and Isaiah were a little bit clunky at times. And they liked being able to put a big in the ball side corner, but then, like, they haven't done a lot of that. And TJ's just like, oh, well, if the spacing's not great, I'm still going to get to my spots on the floor, and we'll just make these lineups work.
I love the whoever fits in next to those four, but like Jackson, Toppin, Siakam, TJ, whoever the hell else is going to be there. I love funky, freaky lineups, and TJ, like, credit to him, just as you said, getting into spots and being like, this is the weirdest spacing I've ever seen. But that's kind of that's his whole bag. He's like, oh, spacing's weird. I'm a point guard. And people, like, he's not a normal point guard, not in the slightest. And he's manipulated and navigated the space wonderfully. And that lineup is weirdly big and, you know, shrinks the floor defensively in some ways. And, like, they compete and they battle. And when weird lineups win minutes, I rejoice because I love weird lineups. And that is what the Vision 6'9" Raptors have taught me to love. So,
those were the main things that I kind of pulled out and thought were interesting about this game and wanted to highlight that the Pacers had done well. Do you have any other thoughts or concerns about anything else that you noticed that maybe I didn't think of? I tried to rewatch this as best I could, just to let people know. I was attempting to do it on hotel Wi-Fi, and there was a portion of the game that I didn't get to rewatch. And obviously, what you're seeing in an arena, sometimes you can miss things, and also sometimes what you're watching on a broadcast, you might not see everything that you see in an arena. So I'm relying on Samson here in case there's something I didn't see or that he wants to speak to.
I would just say that's probably a good place to cut it so that people have as many hours to listen to the podcast before Game 7 as possible, because you had a late day getting back. I did my rock. I had a little day myself. So, yeah, we're recording later than usual.
I can close it out and say I hope everybody enjoys Game 7. We get 2 Game 7s on a Sunday. The Pacers, I feel like, are in pretty good position to potentially steal one. We'll see. I feel like every time I've said something about the Pacers, the absolute opposite things happen. So hopefully I didn't jinx them. And also hopefully somebody sitting at home wears a Goga jersey, because I feel like this is the key to victory. I saw a fan in Indy yesterday wearing a Goga jersey of all things, and I decided that win or lose, that they were going to be responsible for the outcome. So they won. You must wear Goga gear. Anybody that owns Goga gear, put it on.
I'll also say, Indiana, for those who enjoy basketball, your team is in a Game 7 in the second round. This is a playoff run to remember. How better to commemorate it than with this Agrarian Economy of Buckets t-shirt, courtesy of Caitlin Cooper. Like white t-shirts are so easy to wear. They look good. You know, people of Indiana, you're working class, you're salt of the earth. Put it on with a pair of blue jeans. Go on, you know. That's how I do it.
What is your preferred way to style it?
I wear it as I wear all t-shirts, and I do one roll on the sleeve. It's just a nice white tee. I've worn it with blue jeans. I've worn it with black jeans. I've worn it with sweatpants. I've worn it with shorts. Endless possibilities.
I wore it for a time yesterday, and I wore it with ankle pants and yellow and black low top Jordans. That was my preferred look. So it does go with a lot of things. I had a lot of choices of what shoes I could put with it because it was black and white.
It's just a white t-shirt with a little great logo on it. And once again, thank you to the designer for bringing my words to life via your art.
My sister did draw that by hand, for people that don't know. She worked very hard on it. And I still maintain that there's another saying out there about the Pacers and the basketball that they may or may not grow here. I think that this one's an upgrade over that personally.
This one's
I feel like the logo is a bit of an upgrade too.
It's a little esoteric, you know. It's we get to corner the market that wants this. I don't know if like, could you imagine that's like their actual saying is like an agrarian economy of buckets? I want to what the hell are they talking about?
This is my market, Samson. All of my t-shirts are very niche things that I've either turned into bits on Twitter or I've written articles about. Like, if you recognize the things on these shirts, you're probably a very dedicated reader and dedicated fan of the Pacers. Like, you're unique. If you show up at Gamebridge with that shirt on, like, I'm certainly going to spot you and be like, you know style, you know ball.
This is a conversation I had with Brian Scalabrine the last time the Celtics were here. I was
not expecting that. I was expecting like, this is a conversation I had with S or with Trey.
No. It was with Brian Scalabrine. No, I want to ask him kind of like how he views terminology, and because he's a color guy, what you keep in mind with what you're trying to teach the audience. And basically we were asking about like defensive rotations, or not I was asking about defensive rotations. He was kind of like, if my producer isn't going to get it, he's like, I'm probably not going to use it. He's going to the widest possible audience. And I tell you what, we were talking about peel switching. And if you have this shirt, you probably know what a peel switch is. So, yeah.
Or you'd be happy to learn and know.
Yeah.
One or the other, I feel. So I think that's a good place to close it out. Game 7. Obviously, go get a shirt. Obviously, subscribe to patreon.com/basketballshewrote for the coverage of this game and quite possibly the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time in 10 years. And I will add to that if they do make it back to the Eastern Conference Finals, be prepared, because I will claim a victory that I reversed the curse with my reenacted GQ photo. So that's where I will leave it.
Powerful stuff.